Prime Minister Mark Carney there on the harsh reality for Canadians facing U.S. tariffs and economic uncertainty, using those big costs to pitch his budget plan to steer Canada through Donald Trump's second term. Much of the government's plan focuses on creating a market environment to attract big investment in this country eventually. But what's available to Canadian families in the interim? Patty Hajdu is the Minister of Jobs and Families. Hi, Minister. Pleasure to welcome you back to the program. Thanks for making the time.
Great to be here, Vashti.
I have some questions for you about the details of the budget and how they more largely address, or maybe don't address, depending on who you ask, affordability. But I just wanted to start off on what the Prime Minister was focused on today at his announcement, this kind of Buy Canadian strategy, which I think on paper you'd be hard-pressed to find any Canadian who doesn't agree with the intent behind something like that. But I am a bit lost as to the feasibility of it and the specifics of what your government is hoping to accomplish. To what degree do you think this strategy will insulate us from the economic blows vis-a-vis the United States?
Well, I think the intent of the strategy is to help companies that are, providing, whether it's products or services, to have a competitive edge when it comes to federal procurement. So whether it's through crown corporations, departments, or even programs that are funded by the federal government, the opportunity to compete, to be able to get those contracts for Canadian companies, I think needs to be enhanced. And we've been hearing, you're right, you would probably not hear anyone argue against that. In my own riding, for example, there is a plant called Alstom, used to be called Bombardier, very famous, sold to Alstom, and they do rolling stock for TTC, for VIA, for a number of other, train systems. And so the kind of idea around Buy Canadian is to utilize the power of the federal procurement opportunity to help ensure that those kinds of companies can continue to be the great job creators that they are.
And like I said, I do understand the intent, but I think execution, particularly where a government is concerned, is important. So to what degree does your government anticipate what you just spelled out will happen, and by when?
Well, I think the Prime Minister is very determined that it will happen. I think that's why it's prominently featured in our budget. And I know that Procurement Canada has been already working through some of the processes to make this happen. The budget formalizes that, and it provides Procurement Canada. Also, it invests in ISED's capacity, the Economic Development Federal Agency, to be able to help small and medium-sized businesses also compete in this space. So I think, look, this is a very important time where we are seeing attacks on Canadian companies, Canadian corporations that are huge job creators all through Canada. And this is the time to pivot to utilize the purchasing power of the federal government to be able to sustain and maintain those great jobs.
Again, though, on the execution side, if you are one of those small or medium businesses listening tonight, I look at the money that was announced in the budget and re-emphasized today by the Prime Minister. It's spread over 5 years in both the cases of the small and medium business procurement program and when it comes to crown corporations. Does that mean it's going to be 5 years before any of this is realized?
No, not at all. And I think it's spread over 5 years to give the certainty to the teams that will be working on this, that this is not a one-year boom and bust type of a project. This is something that will be sustained. The intent is to be able to launch the processes this spring. This is moving very quickly. There are other countries that already have these kinds of policies in place, namely Australia, Italy, obviously the United States. And this is a hinge moment for the world and global trade in particular. So Canada is getting ready so that we can ensure that our purchasing power federally can benefit our Canadian companies.
Again, though, in an effort to get some specifics, I listened to a very good question, I thought, to the Prime Minister today in New Brunswick, right, from a reporter working locally there who identified the fact that $2 billion worth of forestry products from New Brunswick go to the United States, I believe he said, on something like an annual basis. And the question is, and the question I'd put to you, which I didn't hear an answer from the Prime Minister on, is, so how much does a strategy like that move away? Like how much are you actually going to change as far as that is concerned? Does this really provide enough of a buttress for the kind of pain that has been inflicted on these vulnerable sectors?
Look, I think there's no one silver bullet to protecting Canadian companies. There's not going to be one initiative that's going to protect Canadian companies, but undeniably ensuring that when we do spend federal dollars, which ultimately are Canadians' dollars, that it's spent in the most Canadian way, which is with Canadian businesses, Canadian manufacturers, Canadian businesses that are small, medium in size. And so, look, I think that this is a huge opportunity for the entire landscape of business sector of Canada to be able to be thinking about how they can actually sell and market their goods to the various projects that will be funded federally. Obviously there are things that we directly control, direct federal procurement that is really specifically for Crown corporations. There are things that we're investing in partnership with provinces. So $51 billion to small and rural municipalities in my riding, but also larger municipalities for infrastructure that we need. This will be an opportunity to work with provinces, territories, and municipalities to see if we can't use that money also to stimulate using Canadian product. And you mentioned lumber. That is obviously very important in Northern Ontario as well as steel. So we are at a moment where we need to really all pull together at all levels of government to make sure our Canadian companies are thriving.
And again, just one final question on this. I understand how good that sounds, especially at this moment in time, but isn't it problematic that nobody in your government can articulate any specifics about what this will achieve?
I don't think it is. I don't think it's problematic at all, actually. I think it's ambitious of the government to be tackling trade in a way that actually prioritizes Canadian companies, and is what Canadians expect right now. It's what Canadians are doing, actually. Canadians every single day are making decisions to buy products that are Canadian in nature, whether it's food, whether it's clothing, whether it's equipment, and they're doing, an incredible amount of work to protect the businesses, large, medium, and small, that exist here in the Canadian landscape. We can do that as well, and we will.
Again, I get that, but your government isn't just an everyday Canadian. You're the one saying that you're going to save our economy and drastically reform it, and nobody can provide any specifics about how the component parts will actually do that. In any event, your file is directly related to affordability. So, Minister, I do want to ask you about that. Can you help Canadians who are in particular hurting right now from an economic perspective understand why there wasn't anything new in this budget? Not to say nothing, because there was pre-announced stuff, but anything new in this budget to address a lack of affordability?
Well, I think there are a number of things in the budget that address affordability, both on the side of bringing costs down for Canadians, but also on the side of making sure that Canadians have opportunities in the workforce that are hopefully better paying through skills training, but also that are stimulating the economy in a number of ways. And that investment in infrastructure, for example, is one way that you saw the building trades unions talk about how this is so welcome for skilled tradespeople, for example, to make sure that there's a consistency of work across the country. Childcare is saving Canadian families thousands of dollars every year. In some cases, families with multiple children are talking about $10,000 a year in savings, $15,000 a year in savings, depending on the province that they're in. There's a middle-class tax cut for over 22 million Canadians. Just today, I was at an event in my riding, and a couple came up to me and told me about how dental care has provided them an opportunity to get dental treatment for the first time in 7 years for both of them since they lost their benefits a number of years ago. So the programs that we are continuing to fund, the supports that we're providing to provinces and territories for families, and a number of other elements in the budget that are specific about the costs that families are facing are really important, as well as the investments to stimulate job creation and support people to get those jobs with the skilled trades training and other skills training they need.
On those costs, on bringing costs down, though, I take your point, and I wouldn't take away from the merits of some of the programs that you mentioned. But that is exactly as you framed it, a continuation of what the previous government already had in place. The new measures where housing affordability are concerned are just 60% essentially of the money that you promised you would allocate in the platform. Just 60% of it appears in the budget. You removed a tax a carbon tax that originally the previous government, including yourself, had told us would actually make life less affordable for people if it were removed. I understand that you're saying that you're still doing stuff, but there's nothing in this budget that the people who are experiencing hardship would have said a day later makes their life any easier than it was a day before. Why is that?
Well, I think that's actually not true. I mean, look, the government could have chosen to end a number of programs that are making life deeply affordable for Canadians. Canada Child Benefit is making life more affordable for parents. The working income tax benefit, which has doubled, is making life more affordable for people who are working and earning low wages. We have, as you know, announced a number of different measures to make sure that the benefits that Canadians have accumulated can actually land in their bank accounts through automatic tax filing. And finally, I would would say in my own file, for example, adding 30,000 Canada Summer Jobs positions is a deep reflection of the challenge that youth are having in terms of finding jobs and getting that quality experience on the job. There's also additional supports for work integrated learning for young people who are currently studying, who want to experience paid learning in their sector, which we know results in better attachment to the workforce. So this is deeply a budget that's focused on the immediate costs right now and helping Canadians with those immediate costs and investing in the things that are going to provide better outcomes for Canadians in the years to come.
Okay, I've got to leave it on that note. I appreciate your time as always, Minister. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.